Thank you for coming back. We don't have facilitating individuals or anything, so I'm on my own. As you noticed yesterday, this is where today's story starts. It was very cold, bitterly cold. Late afternoon, early evening in the middle of the Karoo. Should I stop breathing? You see what's going to happen? That better? Not better? Hello? Air conditioning first. That's it? That's it? Just put it back on.
Hello?
Okay? Not? If I speak up? I've lost the dramatic effect. As I was saying, it was bitterly cold. It was late afternoon, early evening, in the middle of the Karoo, winter time. We were huddled around a very small campfire made of what not in that area, what old Plaatjie January always said, crumbs. That part of the Karoo not exactly being well known for firewood. The reason why we were sort of hunched around this fire in a kind of sad, emotional state, as it were, only that morning, by donkey cart messenger, who came to my 1861 restored Karoo cottage in Colesberg, reed ceilings, creaking floors, low doors even for me. You can still see the evidence of staying there for 10, 15 years in the same home from home, as it were. Donkey cart messenger came and said I must come out to the uitspanning, the outspan, at the Hessequa River Bridge, where this small community of Karretjie people had been camping and did sporadically between sharing assignments. And the reason they called me out, 34 kilometers out of town, was, they said, Maatjies Verrooy het gedood. Maatjies Verrooy had died. So I immediately, Maatjies Verrooy, immediately went out to the outspan, and there I ended up sitting next to the fire with what I used to call the great philosophers of the Karretjie people. Christian Steenbok, Isaac and Koot Arnoster, like a rhinoster, like a rhinoceros. Danster Slingerse, the Slingerse having a particular implication. Hendrik Sors, and last but not least, Jan soos hy lê, Abrams. Jan as he lies down, Abrams. In winter or summer, in winter next to that fire, he was the only one not on his haunches at this stage. He was Jan soos hy lê, Abrams next to the fire. In summer, under a bridge or under a acacia tree, he would lie on his hand. And here we were, thinking about and remembering Maatjies Verrooy, her life and her going, and the particular and special place she took in our lives. We cried that night. I had known Maatjies by then for about 20 years. And when I arrived at the outspan, they didn't actually speak to me immediately. They all just pointed at her temporary overnight shelter made of hessian and corrugated iron and fertilizer bags. So I went, as usual, along that little path to her overnight shelter, and I bent down. It's a very small little shelter that they used as overnight housing. And there, a small, wrinkled little body, now lifeless, was lying. So back at the fire, this is what you had to deal with, the going of Maatjies. During the week, with respect, when she was sober, she would greet me with a bright, say, "Kyk my glinster my oë, how bright my eyes are this morning, meneer, mister," at one stage, to get away from the local conditioned mindset of boss. I said, "I'm not your boss, I'm not your boss, I'm Mike." I said, "Oh, but they can't deal with this Mike thing, you know. I mean, look at me, I can't be a Mike." So I said, "Meneer," and somebody in town had heard "Professor." But I'd be away for 2 weeks, come back, and they'd say, "Hello, boss, môre, boss." But Maatjies would say, on such a day in the middle of the week, with his bright eyes, very positive, humorous inclination, disposition, "How are you today, meneer?" And I said, "Maatjies, I'm fine." Should I arrive over the weekend, Maatjies would come up to me and say, "Mike, ek is a drinker. I'm a drinker. I'm a drinker, look at me." And she'd grab me by, I mustn't grab this mic, she'd grab me by in front of the shirt and say, "How about something?" But a wonderful person, but in a sense, symbolic or representative of this community and their way of life. And we'll try to contextualize this phenomenon this morning. Maatjies Verrooy. I'd like to just jump ahead. When this, I used, with the permission of herself then, and the community, as the cover of this particular book. And in Australia, it seemed to draw quite a lot of attention. And an ex-student of mine, Cindy from Sydney in Australia, when she first saw that book, emailed me and said, "So intriguing to see the ancient genes of humankind and the kind heart of humanity shining through her face." That night we sat around the fire and discussed her and her going. They said, "Sy het gegaan van oudheid." She went because of agedness, or old age, if you like, oudheid. Discussed her life and their lives and their situation. And that night, the great philosophers suggested, and we agreed, and we decided that their story should be told, and their story should be told comprehensively, and hence this extended version of their story. Now, she became part of my life, much like the scrublands of the arid Karoo, part of the environment, as it were, and part of my being. But I happened upon her and them totally by accident. I was traveling, coincidentally, from here, literally this campus, We had an international conference here in the previous century, many years ago. Those days we still traveled by road a lot. Couldn't afford to fly all these places, academics. And traveling through the Karoo with this American colleague of mine, she was looking around and said, oh, this desert. You know? And then she saw these people with donkey carts, traversing the arid Karoo landscape. And she asked me, who are they? What is that? And as anthropologists, South African anthropologists, I'm supposed to know all about all the people in this country. I said, I don't know. But I think they might be farm laborers who had been shopping in town and they're now heading back, or they're heading to town to go shopping, or they'd been visiting on a neighboring farm, visiting other laborers or workers on the neighboring farm. I did not know. But I had sabbatical study leave due the next year. So I went back, within a month or two, went back and I went looking for these donkey cart people. Couldn't find them. Now that you're looking for them, they were not there. Went up and down all the roads. Eventually in the back roads, I came upon this, it was 7, 8, 9 temporary overnight shelters. And there I found the people who called themselves Karretjie mense. Nobody else had called them that before. Only they called that. And this brings us back just now to the terminological thing of San and Bushmen and all of that. Subsequently, people started using this term, Karretjie people, or Karretjie mense. Up to that point, some farmers in the area called them Karretjie Busmans. And ironically, or importantly, when I discussed such things with them, like identity and ancestry and so on, and said, ons is nie kleerling nie, we are not colored. They are those guys with the dark glasses who come from the Cape. Ons is die geel mense. We are the yellow people. Ons is Busmans. That's what these Karretjie people told me. I don't know whether they were right or wrong at that stage. But I decided then the next year to start looking at this situation more intensively. Let's just go back. That's the fire and telling the story. Typical scenes. That top picture shows this particular outspan, sometimes referred to as a staaning, meaning that's where they erect their overnight or they stand over with their donkeys and their carts. Uitspanning, outspan, between the road and the farmer's property, the fence of the farmer's property over there, a typical donkey cart. Now, the making of the Karretjie people. In the 1700s, when the first explorers, travelers, and eventually pioneer farmers started moving into this area, there was immediately conflict because of now having to share resources. Resources being the environment, the game, the grazing. And the conflict resulted in the farmers actually trying to get rid of this presence of what they referred to as the Bushmen. Here's an absolutely true example. This farmer's sitting on his stoep early morning, on a Tuesday morning, early morning, before going out and giving instructions to his workers, his laborers for the day, sipping his black sweet coffee, which he'd poured into his saucer to make it cool, and slurping from the saucer. And a horseman galloped into the yard right up to the stoep and said, "Good morning, boss. I've just come to convey a message that there'll be a hunt at Kuilfontein on Saturday. A shoot. Kuilfontein on Saturday. On Saturday morning early, all the farmers in the area gathered at Kuilfontein, and then they went out on the hunt. And they went out to hunt Bushmen, to shoot and kill, mainly the males, because the females were like the spoils of the hunt, and the children, and they were apportioned to the different farmers, and this became formalized and deliberate, organized in a commando system, where commandos would go out on a Bushman hunt and shoot them down. The remaining males, those who escaped, left the district, went up into the hills, the mountains, tried to get away. And in some cases around Colesberg specifically, the one Bushman leader was there for months and years. He would be in the shelters and come and go, and the farmers could never get hold of him. The females, the women and the children were taken to the farms, apportioned to the different hunters, the different members of the commando, if you like. And there they became known as mak Bushmans, tame Bushmen, who were trained to work in the house or around the house, the females. And when the young boys grew up and got stronger, and the first sheep became available in the area, they learned not only the conventional skills of a Karoo farm, but they also learned to shear merino sheep. And as this kind of farming became more lucrative and more intensive, and these special breeds were brought in from France and from Australia, and the flocks got bigger, and eventually around the turn of the century, in the 1900s, when fencing came in, at first there were these stone walls, but mainly for ostrich farming, only that high so that they can't get over the ostriches, or if they flap their wings, they can't hurt them. So they're not high, too high and nor too low. But after that, when the proper fencing, the wire fencing came in, it was possible for the farmers to do more intensive merino wool sheep farming. And the need for shearing increased incrementally, and the then skilled young males, skilled in the sense that they could shear, and by then their small families, and by then their little community of Karretjie people, brothers, if you like, with their wives and children, sometimes a granny or a grandfather, still extended family, young children, who were moving around. The Bushmen, that incidentally these Bushmen, now think back to our crest and motto yesterday, were the calm, /XAM, calm. Those were the people. Descendants of the males became the shearers. And they responded to this demand, this need for sporadic, intensive shearing of larger flocks of sheep on demand. They became a floating source of labor in the sense of skilled shearers in every district in the Karoo. After many years of my own kind of research, anthropological, I regard it as a soft science, work with oral tradition, sometimes obviously also archival documents, other documents, participation with the people, getting information in that way. We followed up eventually in that area, and also as far as some of the other projects are concerned, with genetic analysis. And we did sampling amongst the Karretjie people. As I explained yesterday, at that stage we had to take blood, and I had to set the example, in spite of my phobia for needles. And they did me and the Karretjie people at that stage. And the result was that upon analysis, it was 100% confirmed that these Karretjie people of today still are the direct descendants not only of the Kham, the Bushmen of the Karoo, but also the Khoekhoen, as we said, the other pronunciation, Khoe, Khoen. The current contemporary Khoi, incidentally, of the Karoo and much of the Free State are the Korana, and there are still descendants of them. They also just another Khoi community like the Griekwa, Korana, Hessequa, Tsainakwa, Outeniqua, Gouritsrivier, Gourikwa, all communities of the Khoi. This analysis confirmed 100%. DNA, genetic analysis, is not a debate. It's not speculation. It's a fingerprint. It says, these people were your ancestors. And not only that, that's a tree for humanity. All of us fit on that tree somewhere. Many of us have our own special little branch somewhere. The European branches are up there, the purple bluish ones. And the older branches are down here. The oldest branch is this one, the LO branch. And the oldest sub-branch of the oldest branch is LOD and LOD3. These people all belong to this sub-branch. Not only that, one male individual that we sampled, still now, and this was almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, is still the oldest such sample ever taken anywhere in the world at any time. For ethical reasons, unidentified, this gentleman, they are descendants of the oldest genome, the oldest group of humanity in Southern Africa. Now this reflects and refers back to some of the things that we were starting to say yesterday, these forgotten people, yet earliest and the earliest people of South Africa. Omamita, just an example of a matriarch, much like Maatjies Verrooy. Maatjies was much more of a character though. Omamita was much more really a matriarch example, not only to her children and other relations, but particularly to her grandchildren. She fell off a donkey cart at one stage though, even years before I met her. And because she wasn't treated properly, or she wasn't even taken for treatment anywhere, she ended up hurting her back to the extent that the only way she could still walk anywhere was like this. And they would put her on a donkey cart on a regular basis and take her to Colesberg, to the appropriate office, so that she could draw her pension, which also didn't exist when I started working with them. They weren't registered. They weren't eligible. They were not getting pension because their births weren't registered. They were invisible in terms of that community and in terms of our society. But once we managed to facilitate the fact that they could get pension, in their case disability and old age pension, which was a meager amount. I think at that stage it was like 750 rand. The entire little community at the outspan at the Hessequa River would for weeks on end live off that amount in between shearing assignments. Because shearing is not a daily, weekly, monthly, not even in the Karoo where the farmers shear different lengths of wool. Some shear at 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, depending on what kind of market they're aiming at. It is sporadic, but it's not continuous. So there are very lean periods. They would shear at a farmer for 2 weeks, 3, 4, 5,000 sheep. If it's not interrupted by rain, then there's no income because they don't shear wet wool. After those weeks, and during those 2 weeks, they would buy in the store, the store of the farmer, where he has basic supplies like tobacco, importantly, sugar, coffee, mealie meal and stuff. They would buy on the book. And at the end of the 2 weeks, payout time comes, and Kurt Arnoster and his entire family of 5 would pack up their stuff, get on the donkey cart and go shopping in town, and he would ride away with 34 rand 50 cents after subtractions from the book, the store, and purchases done there. Symbolic of Karretjie people. As I say, they are invisible people. That sign, incidentally, is in the Karoo town of Daar. No donkey cart people allowed. They have to park outside, and maybe if they want to walk in and then buy something with their 34 rand or so, they can come and go to the co-op or one of those shops and buy as much as they can afford. Very much still the invisible people, despite the fact that they render an indispensable service to the agricultural economy of the Karoo. That has changed. That is changing because of competition outside, unionized shearers coming in. The Karretjie people call them the elektrische manne, the electrics, because they come with these fancy electrical shears and machines. They're much quicker, they're not neater. Karretjie people are a little slower, but they are better, they're neater, and they don't nick the sheep as much as these other people who are going for time, and they're just churning up. They might do 50, 60 a day. The best Karretjie person that I ever encountered was in the 40s and maybe 50. Excellent, one of the best. Even went to Australia and won the prize as the best shearer for hand shearing. Excellent shearers. And they spend their time in the shearing shed. They have to catch the sheep. As you know, some of you might have a Karoo experience from the holding pen. Take the sheep out there and to his shearing spot over here, and then position the sheep and clench with his knees and start in a particular way. Incidentally, I investigated this through a colleague of mine that I mentioned yesterday, Alan Barnard at Edinburgh University. He lives out in the countryside with the permission of the farmer. He built his house on a farm, a sheep farm. Not his farm, not his sheep, but the shearers come there. Now, the Scottish shearers shear in a totally different way. They go the length of the back of the sheep. These shearers go across the back. They sort of peel off layer by layer, they peel off until the whole fleece is lying there, and they gather this and put this on the sorting table. 8 to 10 hours in this position. In sweltering heat, I measured in one shearing shed, it was 44 degrees in summer, and they're shearing. And I would arrive with the permission of the farmer. They are the lords of the manor. They determine access to their property, whether it be the shearers, and nowadays they're not even allowed to set up camp on the farm. They have to set up camp in the nearest dirt road, gravel road, close to the access to the farm. He doesn't want the hele gespuis, the hele trek. He doesn't want this whole lot, Karretjie people, grannies, children, chicken, dogs on his farm, so they have to camp. So access also for an anthropologist is by permission of the farmer. So one of the very first such occasions, I was invited to come and see how the people shear on that particular farm in the shearing. So I was standing here on one side. I had been interacting with these particular people for quite a while and quoting the language of the area. The maid would bring a tray, nicely covered, with scones and tea and stuff for the farmer and for me, the other boss, and we would drink tea, and here the people are bent over shearing surreptitiously. By that time they would shear and sort of look up at me, and you can imagine what I feel. I was standing with a cup of tea and they're shearing over there. But late that afternoon, early evening, I would go back to the outspan. We'd sit down and discuss this, and they would tell me all sorts of things about that farmer and other farmers, who he's sleeping with. And I'm not implying his wife. How much money he owes so-and-so for whatever. When he goes into town to supposedly play at the tennis club, but goes to the club and imbibes, etc. They knew everything about these people. And then they would tell me that very day, that very afternoon, evening, I'd sit there and said, I nearly mentioned his name. Daibas, say. I'm translating into English now. That professor is going to spoil you to the point that you won't want to work anymore, ever. Implying that I'm an outsider. What am I doing in that district? I mean, imagine traveling in your bakkie, and this outspan was near that bridge here. These vehicles going. They just glance up and say, oh, that's Colin Murray. Glance up, oh, there goes Koos. They knew all about. And those same people, Colin and Koos, would look out the window and look down at the outspan. So here's this white guy sitting around the fire with the Karretjie people. I made a point of not accepting invitations to dinner, to braai, to a hunt in the winter, in order to establish my rapport, my particular relationship with the Karretjie people. But they are invisible, in every sense of the word. They're part of the environment. They're part of the scrubland. They're part of the doringbome, the acacia, the thorn trees of the environment. One after the other farmer would invite me and say, come over. I hear jy stel belang in die Karretjie Bushmen. So you're interested in these Karretjie Bushmen. I can tell you all about them. I've lived there all my life. My father was before me. So I would go and have coffee with him and say, wow, you know, I'm fairly new in this. I'm an anthropologist. I'd like to find out more. Tell me about them. Nothing. I think his name is Quit. What's his surname? Don't know. Where does he come from? Don't know. Where are they originally from? I don't know. I'll go and ask my foreman or foreman. Maybe they knew nothing. Third generation farmers, third generation Karretjie people, third generation shearers. They knew nothing about them, really. Poorest of the poor. This space, that is the Karoo. They have no place in that space. I was on a CSIR team. We met over 3 years. The final report was published end of last year. It's now available on fracking and the role played by fracking, or the role fracking could play, the positive and the negative. It was supposedly, we had physicists, we had geomorphologists, we had geologists, we even had anthropologists, we had sociologists, we had environmentalists. Everybody gave their particular opinion. With no implication at all. The positive, as I say, it's an economic injection. It'll be wonderful for the Karoo. Gas, better kind of energy, job creation. Job creation, incidentally, nonsense, because you need specialist people for that, particularly at the exploitation, not the exploration phase. Maybe for a short while you need laborers, unskilled people who can do something. But when they resurfaced the N1 just 400 meters away from a Karretjie encampment, they used people from Kuyasa, which is a township in Colesberg, for the unskilled work. They never even looked at the Karretjie people. They didn't use them to wield a spade of an axe or anything like that. So whether trucking comes or doesn't come, it's negative. Both counts. Poorest of the poor. We have geographies of poverty in this country. The old homelands, Bantustans, that's a particular kind of poverty, still there. You can just go through the old Transkei travel and you'll understand what I'm talking about. The kind of poverty in the urban sprawl, informal settlements, squatter settlements, millions of people living in squalor. But you also have a third kind of geography of poverty in the farming areas, particularly the Karoo farming areas. These kinds of invisible people. And by every measure and every formula, 3 different universities in this country have created a measure, a formula that you can measure poverty, quantify poverty. The Karretjie people are the poorest by far, objectively measured. And they're disappearing off the roads, disappearing off the outspans, and I'll mention that now. Not only geographies of poverty, gender roles, looking for energy in the gang, the passage next to the road, between the fence of the farm and the road. They walk for kilometers, miles, just to get, you see, the crumbs, the crumbs that old January was pointing at, that's the kind of firewood that they have to do with in winter. I mentioned the temperature in summer. I measured the temperature inside these temporary shelters. In winter, it went to -9 inside the shelter. And they'd make a fire inside that temporary shelter and then huddle together, the entire little family. And the shelter is this, with that table as the circumference. That is the size of the floor space of such a shelter. They'd huddle together. The fire would die. They do have a few blankets. And then see through a cold night in minus temperatures. Old Koot once said to me, you know what? I said, was it cold? You know, I was in town, it was very cold. He says it was so cold that het dwars deur die dak geryp it frosted right through the roof because the vapor of their breathing, of course, it looked like an igloo inside. It looked like an igloo. It was white and icy inside. And they were huddled together. And they stay in that position for practical reasons, but also for obvious reasons. They couldn't move. They had to fall. When the sun comes up and heats up the iron, corrugated iron, scrap iron, then they start forming and they can start moving their limbs and crawl out and make a fire for coffee in the morning. Incredible situation, incredible conditions that they live in. And the women have it all. They stay at home, some of them, most of them. Some are also invited to the farm as extra help around the house, to help the in-house domestic, sweep the yard or something like that. The men obviously are away shearing in the shed. That's an encampment. That's Slinger's downstairs. Slinger's there on the left. Emma and her son in front of her little shelter. And on the right, that is Tuk Tuk, one of 4 children of Quit Arnoster, Tuk Tuk Arnoster, Renoster, Rhinoceros. A lot of these names, Steenbok, Springbok, Arnoster, you find those sorts of names amongst them. And he was privileged to give this little foal a name. The young son gives the donkey the name and retains that name in perpetuity. When we started initiating schooling at the farm schools, I got significant money from United Nations and also from a private benefactor in Johannesburg with old money. He liked some of the articles that he read of mine, and the Karretjie people said, oh, we'd like to help these people. So we got a mobile team. The system was called SALT, Skills and Literary Training. So we tried to teach the women skills to make things, to augment their income. It was a holistic sort of approach, trying to do all sorts of things. And it was also literally a literacy exercise. So that, and this was an ethical decision we had to take 2 decades ago to decide that we are in fact going to be instrumental in changing the way of life of these people. It's a massive responsibility. But we had to make a call because they were illiterate. They still are. A lot of them are still illiterate. We managed to facilitate mobile teaching units. We had to follow them. The teaching, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, spells out the right to education for every South African. They didn't get any. They were illiterate. They still are, many are. We managed to facilitate for some of the children to be accommodated at farm schools, arrange transport. And then we had these mobile units. We had to take a blackboard and all the other equipment to them, to the outspan. We traveled the whole Karoo out, 5 teams with this money we had going to them and teaching them. Practical problem, the men are in the shearing shed in a week for 10 to 12 hours. When they come out of there, they're tired. Over weekends, they're tired and they'd have a few drinks. With a poor diet and a few drinks, it had disastrous results on them. No learning. We had a measure of success with the females, with writing and reading. Endemic poor quality of education in South Africa, the farm schools I've mentioned. There wasn't a culture of learning amongst the people. We started managing to do that. The parents started discussing and saying for the first time ever, through all these generations, I actually think it's a good thing that young Quit should go to school, because when I come to town to that office, there are all these papers, and they ask me to sign and fill. I don't understand. I can't read that stuff. I don't have access to those sorts of the bureaucracy. I want my son and my daughter to learn to write so that they can, on my behalf, negotiate those forms and the bureaucracy. Itinerancy, moving around, we had to try to adapt to that. Typical. That is one of twins named Rocky's little dress. And those are the toys, stick dolls, stock popper on the right that she makes. Just above the stock popper, you see a clay cart, a donkey cart that her twin brother made. And below On the left, typical. You have to go to a windmill somewhere and fetch water with a donkey cart. And sometimes the farmers won't even allow them access to that part of the property to get the water. And the Hessequa River I mentioned was not always in flood, obviously, being the Karoo, and water wasn't easily available. Some of the clay toys that Rocky's twin brother, they called him Okie, little fellow, little dress and little fellow, the twins. They are now grown up with families. And he saw some of this. I once just observed while 3 or 4 of these little guys were playing with their donkey carts, but also with clay animals and so on. And the one would stand up and shout at them in Afrikaans, their kind of Afrikaans, which incidentally, I've got a paragraph of Afrikaans here that Afrikaans-speaking people can't understand. Karretjie Afrikaans, the idiom. This is why I eventually did this book also in Afrikaans, because this is what the market, it's not a lucrative market, this Afrikaans one. I didn't translate that book. I rewrote this and tried to capture some of the idiom of the Karretjie people in this book. And people are quite interested in that as well. And this one little guy was shouting at us, Marianne! I said, what's going on here? You know, okay. He said, no, I'm the boss. And these guys, they're working for me on the farm. I told them, don't be so lazy. Go and do that and that. So they're enacting what they were exposed to for their entire life, you know, on the farm. Play acting the pattern of the wider society. I mentioned the shale gas, contextual variables. Other contextual variable, other shearers coming in, organized shearers, on demand that on a Monday at 7 o'clock they would be there, unionized, managed well. Sometimes, and the local farmers knew, if you want the Karretjies, they sometimes, many of them still preferred Karretjie because of what I said. They might be slower, but they're better. And also, importantly for the farmers, they can actually order them around and demand certain things and scold them and so on. So competition for shearing, and not least, game farms. In the Colesberg district, again, 3-4 farms were gobbled up by outside buyer, put down the fences, took out the merino sheep, put in game, no more shearing for the entire Karretjie community in the western side of Colesberg because of a new game farm. So they're faced with this. So the ethical call that we had to make seemed to be the right thing, to try to ensure that they have other options, other possibilities, other than just being good shearers. Christine on the way on the back of a Karretjie, fully loaded with little dog and chicken. And these are the kinds of things that the farmers eventually would not allow on their farm anymore. They had to camp somewhere close by. Now, the projects, I said, the teaching projects that we had, it was a comprehensive program. It's actually 2 projects. The one refers to preschool children trying to orientate, because they would end up, even at the farm school, these young kids, never ever having held a crayon, a pencil in their hands. They didn't know how to. And that applied even to the adult women. When we started with their literacy program, we had to, as you can see there, start off the index finger. They literally weren't used to grasping a thing like a pencil to write. So we started, they clear it, the facilitators got them to clear a spot in the dust, and they would write A, B, C, and eventually very basic sort of reading stuff. I'd been away for a number of weeks and went back to one of these sessions out at the Outspan. And the group of women sitting around fiddling in the sand, they called me over and said, I must just stand there. I said, what's going on? I said, just stand there. And one of them, they looked at each other, and one of them cleared that spot of sand, and with the index finger, she went, M, I, K, E, Mike. And I thought that was rather special, on many counts. Here they were breaking through this incredible barrier where everything was just closed to them, and they could access, for the first time in their lives, documentation. Contemporary situation. Just a few weeks ago, again, a journalist called me and asked me, what have I learned from this experience of mine over many decades, number of decades with the Karretjie people? And I think this is more or less what I responded. Well, the Karretjie people have taught me about being human, about the human condition. Even given their dire circumstances, they have this unquenchable spirit. For them, each day dawns brightly, and their outlook is always tinged with a humorous disposition. And then I mentioned that response I had from Australia in terms of the cover there. And if I can share, a very prominent Afrikaans writer had this, and I'm going to do this in Afrikaans just to retain a bit of the idiom and immediately give you the translation. This is the writer Etienne Leroux, very well known in Afrikaans literature. And this is what he wrote in one of his books. Johannes Garries kyk na die swart Karoo, dis sy wêreld, die ongenadiglike wildernis wat hy liefhet. Donkiekarretjies met 'n gedeelte van die familie op pad, asook 3 skape, 'n hoenderhok met 2 henne en 'n haan op die flap van die karretjie. Hy het skielik sy armoede en die wildernis lief. Johannes Garries looks at the swart Karoo. This is his world, the merciless wilderness that he loves. Donkey cart with part of the family on the road. Also 3 sheep, a chicken coop with 2 hens, and a cock on the flap of the cart. He suddenly loves his poverty, and he loves his wilderness. Our Noster family, those little ones are the twins, Oukie and Rockies. That's Tuk Tuk that we saw with the donkey, a visiting friend and the daughter. Quit our Noster. Put his cap on a particular angle. I don't normally ask them to pose in that way, but he had to have his cap in a rather special sort of angle for this picture. He ended up in jail twice, once for stabbing his wife and killing her, because there was no assistance, no medical service available in the area, by accident. He had been out drinking with friends on a weekend, came back late, and just came to his shelter and then walked away again, and his wife called him and said, "No, you can't go, you've had enough, come back now." And he said, he shouted at her in this state, and he still had a shear lying next to his, and he picked that up and sort of stabbed at her and stabbed her into the main artery over here, and she bled to death that night. So at that stage, they didn't put him in jail, said, on your responsibility, given those children, you have to look after them first. But then it happened once again. They'd been visiting his next partner, and they have a rather special way of marrying, if you like, selecting partners. Never really done, or it used not ever to be done in magistrate court or church or in a conventional way that we might be familiar with. But he had this partner. They'd been visiting on a farm. The both of them came walking back in the moonlight and got into an argument, and he used his walking stick, and she was hitting at him and hitting back and hit her against the head. She fell over, and he fell over because he was drunk, and the sun woke him up against this dam wall. They were walking against this earthen wall on a farm on the way back to the outspan, and she never woke up. So this time they put him in jail in Colesberg and arranged for that old granny, Mita, that we saw to look after, particularly the young children. So the situation domestically horrendous. It was at that stage. And I want to conclude with this, if I may. Harsh and hospitable as the Karoo may seem, every day the setting sun transforms the harshness of the region into softer hues of early evening. This seems to further accentuate the ostensible empty quietness of the vast plains and rugged hills of a region symbolized by its gentle and genteel pulse of pastoral life. Often, however, this is but a veneer which disguises the real reality of hardship of large numbers of the invisible people who eke out an existence in the Karoo. Thank you. We're nicely on schedule again. And the chairman says, the chair lady says we can take questions.
Can you tell us how many Karoo people are
They have not died out. Their way of life we're talking about, a minority. Very few of them are still on the road. Very few of them are literally still sharing as itinerants, moving their donkey carts from farm to farm. In only some districts and only some parts of some districts you find this. Many of them are now, most of them are now in informal settled squatters on the periphery of Karoo towns. But in such a case, very often the farmer still, when he comes to town, stops at the outspan and says, Hessequa Khoekhoen, the leader, sort of informal leader of the sharing team, says, we're sharing on Monday at my farm. I'll pick you up here. So the way of life has virtually disappeared, but the people are still there and the descendants. What is changing, that some of those children are now no longer, the young boys, as they get stronger, no longer opting for sharing as occupation. Also because sharing is becoming less available in the Karoo. When we started out with this, even then I couldn't answer your question properly. How many Karretjie people were there in, this was 91, when I passed through with that American colleague and we saw the Karretjie people. 92, we did a census in different districts. But the problem is, and let me give you an example. The census people came out. I experienced the first election with them, stood in a queue at the caravan in the middle of nowhere. Remember, they had mobile voting stations and they put one down in the Karoo for this. And I had to race up and down town to get temporary documentation for them to be able to vote. They had no ID documents. They were identityless. They were invisible, non-existent. We got these, and then eventually, here I stood in the queue with Quota Noster in front of me, who earned that 34 Rand in 2 weeks. Behind me, a farmer with 5 farms, like 6,000 hectares, only the one farm, a millionaire by all. But I actually, a nice sort of sense of satisfaction when I stood there for a long time. It's a long queue to this caravan. Because this vote, this 44 Rand, 34 Rand vote, counted as much as this 7 million Rand vote on that day. The census people would come, and I met up with one of them in a local pub in Colesberg, which is where anthropologists get most of their best information. You have to be in that sort of situation. And he asked me about it. He said, I said, how's it going? He said, is anybody doing in the district? And yes, and he shared some of information. He would come up to the Hessequa River and line the people up like that picture and say, didn't bother to ask them names because they would be slow in understanding what they want, and said, mistake number 1, mistake number 2, mistake number 2. House, tick the box, yes. Water, there's a trickle in the Hessequa River, yes. That's the kind of census. And then they would go to another place, and the people would have moved for sharing to another, and they'd count them again. See how insensitive they were with actual people that they were dealing with, the identity, even the appearance of the people. And sometimes they would move to 2 places and find nobody at all. So they missed out on counting some of them. Others they counted double. Maybe the statisticians can tell us that this would even out, that they eventually got too close. We didn't know. We guessed, extrapolated from districts and actual count to 2,000-3,000 people, Great Karoo at that stage, 1992.
What's the genetic resemblance between the Karretjie people and the San?
Direct descendants. As I said, with the genetic analysis, it shows up 100%. But thank you for the question. Sorry, you had a question, I'll get back to you now. What I didn't mention, in the mitochondrial. Remember that the commandos went out, shot the males, or they disappeared out of the district. The females went onto the farm. The female line shows 100% Kham, Bushmen descent and Khoekhoen. As far as the Y chromosome, the male line is concerned, much more varied. Yes. Yes. Still happen. What happened when, in the early days when I arrived on a farm, they had an insensitive ear to if they even asked, what is your name? They didn't get it. They would get, if they got a response, it would be, say, okay, Geelboy. And if it's a Joubert, if he goes away after generations, he'd become Joubert because he worked for a Joubert on the farm Kleinfontein. And not Kleinklon, but Geelboy of Swartboy, because you're a bit darker skin. Jy's Swartboy, jy's Geelboy, Witboy, jy lyk amper soos 'n Witman, Witboy. They gave them names and they retained those names. Even now. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How widespread were these people? Were they, for instance, in the Hunt on the one hand, down in Ladysmith? How widespread?
Yes. The answer is yes. I can go on for 20 minutes mentioning every Karoo town in the Great Karoo. Not the Oudtshoorn side, not the Klein Karoo, the Great Karoo. Bridgetown, Skolsburg, Victoria West, Uppington as far north, Graaff-Reinet, Middelburg, right down to Craddock, that area, yes. Great Karoo, that was where they were. Yes, sir.
So then how did what's the distribution of Bushmen descendants then among the farm laborers themselves?
Okay, now that my answer needs to be qualified. Depends on who the farm laborers are, because a lot of people, even in the middle 1900s, laborers came from what was then the Transkei, black laborers, if you like, Xhosa-speaking people. So those people would have a totally different DNA than the so-called, what the farmers would call Karretjie Bushmen or colored people. The so-called colored people on the farm would often have this same kind of ancestry, descendants of the Kham and the Khoi people of that area. Depends on which and what people the farmer employed on the farm. They didn't always use just the local people. In fact, to the contrary.
What
Yes.
year did the Commando take place, more or less?
1700s already, the late 1700s, yeah. And they kept a record. It's in the archives here in Cape Town. I looked at that, and each commando, after such a expedition, if you like, would have to submit a report and say, we shot 324. And they would add these up, and it came to 50, 60,000. But half of them never reported or didn't report fully or accurately. And it could be hundreds of thousands of Bushmen who were literally exterminated, shot on the hunt.
Does your research overlap with Garth Sampson in the Hessequa Khoekhoen?
Very nicely. Garth and I spend a lot of time in serious debate and conversation. I won't mention the venue. But my presence overlapped with his work. He worked on the Hessequa River, as you know. And in fact, he wrote a number of pieces. And what I'm talking about now, in those pieces, he refers to as, quote unquote, the Bushman War. Farmers versus the Bushmen at that time. And these excavations and his findings helped me a lot, to show. Yes, yeah. I used, in that book and in other publications, I used a lot of his information. And eventually I've even used some of my information that, from the oral tradition point of view. And also I found some sites and places, particularly around homesteads, where I saw the remains of things that looked intriguing. And not looking with an archaeological eye, I asked other people, and he came back. He was still coming back at that stage to South Africa. And then he found new places to excavate and to look at things. His project was one of the biggest ever in archaeology, mainly because it wasn't excavation. It was a surface survey. He had a lot of students, as you know, year after year after year, and they would walk the Karoo at almost arm length. And like I showed one shelter. You remember yesterday there was one slide with just a circle of stone. That was the old Bushman shelter. That's the kind of thing that Garth found hundreds, because this is the archaeology they were doing. Surface surveying.
Are there parallels to the Australian Aborigines at all? And where would they fit on your tree?
They fit on a tree fairly low down as well, of the Karretjie people. Christian Steenbok, Isaac and Koot Arnoster, like in a rhinoster, like in a rhinoceros. Daanster Slingerse. The Slingerse having a particular implication. Hendrik Sors, and last but not least, Jan soos hy lê, Abrams. Jan as he lies down, Abrams. In winter or summer, in winter next to that fire, he was the only one not on his haunches at this stage. He was Jan soos hy lê, Abrams next to the fire. In summer, under a bridge or under a acacia tree, he would lie on his hand. And here we were, thinking about and remembering Maatjies Verrooy, her life and her going, and the particular and special place she took in our lives. We cried that night. I'd known Maatjies by then for about 20 years. And when I arrived at the outspan, they didn't actually speak to me immediately. They all just pointed at her temporary overnight shelter made of Hessian and corrugated iron and fertilizer bags. So I went, as usual, along that little path to her overnight shelter, and I bent down. It's a very small little shelter that they used as overnight housing. And there, a small, wrinkled little body, now lifeless, was lying. So back at the fire, this is what you had to deal with, the going of Maatjies. During the week, with respect, when she was sober, she would greet me with a bright, say, "Kyk my glinster my oë," how bright my eyes are. This in the middle of the Karoo, winter time. We were huddled around a very small campfire made of what not in that area, what old Plaatjie January always said, crummels, crumbs. That part of the Karoo not exactly being well known for firewood. The reason why we were sort of hunched around this fire in a kind of sad, emotional state, as it were, only that morning, by donkey cart messenger, who came to my 1861 restored Karoo cottage in Colesberg, reed ceilings, creaking floors, low doors even for me. You can still see the evidence of staying there for 10, 15 years in the same home from home, as it were. Donkey cart messenger came and said I must come out to the uitspanning, the outspan, at the Hessequa River Bridge, where this small community of Karretjie people had been camping and did sporadically between sharing assignments. And the reason they called me out 34 kilometers out of town was, they said, Maatjies Verrooy het gedood. Maatjies Verrooy had died. So I immediately, Maatjies Verrooy, immediately went out to the outspan, and there I ended up sitting next to the fire with what I used to call the great philosophers. Discussed their life and their lives and their situation. And that night, the great philosophers suggested, and we agreed, and we decided that their story should be told, and their story should be told comprehensively, and hence this extended version of their story. Now, she became part of my life, much like the scrublands of the arid Karoo, part of the environment, as it were. and part of my being. But I happened upon her and them totally by accident. I was traveling, coincidentally, from here, literally this campus. We had an international conference here in the previous century, many years ago. Those days we still traveled by road a lot. Couldn't afford to fly all these places, academics. And traveling through the Karoo with this American colleague of mine, she was looking around, saying, oh, this desert. You know? And then she saw these people with donkey karretjies, donkey carts, traversing the arid Karoo landscape. And she asked me, who are they? What is that? And as anthropologist, South African anthropologist, I'm supposed to know all about all the people in this country. I said, I don't know. But I think they might be farm laborers who had been shopping in town and they're now heading back, or they're heading to town to go shopping, or they'd been visiting on a neighboring farm, visiting other laborers or workers on the neighboring farm. I did not know. But I had sabbatical study leave due the next year. So I went back, within a month or two, went back and I went looking for these donkey cart people. Couldn't find them. Now that you're looking for them, they were not there. Went up and down all the roads, eventually in the back roads. Thank you for coming back. We don't have facilitating individuals or anything, so I'm on my own. As you noticed yesterday, this is where today's story starts. It was very cold, bitterly cold. Late afternoon, early evening in the middle of the Karoo. Should I stop breathing? You see what's going to happen? That better? Not better? Hello? Air conditioning first. That's it. That's it. Just put it back on.
Hello?
Okay? Not? If I speak up? I've lost the dramatic effect. As I was saying, it was bitterly cold. It was late afternoon, early evening, this morning. Meneer, Mr., at one stage, to get away from the local conditioned mindset of boss, I said, I'm not your boss, I'm not your boss, I'm Mike. I said, oh, but they can't deal with this Mike thing, you know. I mean, look at me, I can't be a Mike. So I said, Meneer, and somebody in town had heard Professor. But I'd be away for 2 weeks, come back, and they'd say, hello, boss, more boss. But Mikeys would say, on such a day, in the middle of the week, with his bright eyes, very positive, humorous inclination, disposition, how are you today, Meneer? And I said, Mikeys, I'm fine. Should I arrive over the weekend, Mikeys would come up to me and say, Mike, ek is a drinker. I'm a drinker. I'm a drinker, look at me. And she'd grab me by, I mustn't grab this mic, she'd grab me in front of the shirt and say, how about something? But a wonderful person, but in a sense symbolic or representative of this community and their way of life. And we'll try to contextualize this phenomenon this morning. Maatjies verrooi. I'd like to just jump ahead when this, I used with the permission of herself then and the community as the cover of this particular book. And in Australia it seemed to draw quite a lot of attention, and an ex-student of mine, Cindy from Sydney in Australia, when she first saw that book, emailed me and said, "So intriguing to see the ancient genes of humankind and the kind heart of humanity shining through her face." That night we sat around the fire and discussed her and her going. They said, "Sy het gegaan van oudheid." She went because of agedness or old age.